Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Many thanks and thank you for staying tuned to Early Exchange this Tuesday. I'm Blessing Eichie, as you know. Don't worry about my partners, don't worry. I never fly solo on the show because you get to see TC in a bit. But before you get to see TC and then I introduce to you my guest, a background on what we'll be talking about today. We're taking a look at Africa's countries and their currencies, how they faring. We'll begin with Kenya, where the shilling is said to be doing quite well against the US dollar. Even for Ghana, it is saying that the Ghana Cedi is quite stable. It is even expected for the Nigerian Naira to be stable in the next coming week. But what is happening with these currencies? Looking at the Kenya shilling, what has made it to appreciate against the US dollar? So these are some of the issues that we'll be looking at. By the way, the government has released about $50 billion worth of bonds, and that is attracting investors from the diaspora. So there's been some remittances into the Kenya economy, remittances from the diaspora causing the Kenya shilling to appreciate it. But beyond that, what are some other factors that are responsible for the appreciation of Kenya's currency and how can it be sustained? We've noticed that sometimes there's a trend where countries in Africa, the currencies seem to appreciate against the US dollar or be stable. But after a while, it seems that cannot be sustained. So we're looking at sustainability of the stability in the currencies of some countries in Africa. I did tell you that my partner, not in crime this time around, but in shaping policy, Temple TC Barrah. I like to put a TC, even though that's his initials, but so that whenever you hear TC and you hear Temple, you don't get to wonder, are they two different people? It's just one man, but he has two different ways of addressing himself. So Temple Barrah is here with me this morning. Good morning, Temple.
Good morning. I mean, at some point when it felt like I had the identity crisis, I always had to put the TC in between. So you do not mix up Temple and TC and you're not at loss as to if Temple is TC and TC is Temple. So Temple is just my first name, TC are my initials. So Temple C. Barrah, so that's just it. But I rather you just call me TC. You know how there's some persons like Temple of what, Temple of who, Temple of where, so to save you
well, Temple of Sick News.
Temple of Sick News.
All right. Yeah. So how are you doing this morning?
Well, I was a bit under the weather, but sometimes when you realize that what you do is for the greater good, so that's what drives you. That's the fuel. That's the energy. I mean, stems from the passion, yeah. But exigencies can happen, but somehow you're just supposed to surmount all of that. So I'm good. I'm gearing to go.
All right. Now that you're gearing to go, and I will say go. So in going to the issue for discuss this morning, we're looking at Kenya and Ghana. Those are our neighbors, in Africa, looking at the currency. And you did mention the word fuel. So a good currency or a stable currency should be able to at least fuel economic growth. Remember when the Naira was falling and it was as if who's going to catch the Naira? The Nigerian economy did suffer for it, even though for a bit now it seems like the Naira is a bit stable or it will get stable. But looking at the Kenya shilling now, it is forecasted that in this week and in the coming week, the Kenya shilling will appreciate against the US dollar. Now, this has been attributed to some economic conditions that are quite favorable for the Kenya shilling. I'm talking about the inflow of forex into the Kenya economy, the inflow from diaspora, because the government has released bonds, which is attracting foreign investors, some of them Kenyans who live abroad, and some other conditions. But the problem here is not about the Kenya shilling actually appreciating, because we've seen things like this happen with different countries in Africa where the currency appreciates very well. It's this sustainability of the appreciation of the currency. But we're going to look at some factors that have led to this. For Ghana, it is expected that the Ghana Cedi will remain stable and steady for a while against the US dollar. And this also has been attributed to some corporate import demand. So we're looking at all of this for the African countries. It seems like it's good news for their economies.
Okay, so over the last few weeks, we've been talking about instability in currencies across the world. For Kenya, it seems like they're doing something right. And, you had mentioned fuel. The prices of commodities, especially basic food items and fuel, has dropped drastically, which is what was very rife with the Nigerian, if you had to put it side by side with Nigeria, a lot of people, especially as a result of what led to the protests, people calling for a reversal of the price of petroleum products and fuel. So it was really crazy because that had like some sort of effect on the other ancillary services, transportation, cost of other goods and stuff. So it was difficult to contain that. So, I mean, kudos to them. But then you've talked about sustainability. We're going to also look at the impact of, what a stable currency would do for the Kenyan economy.
All right, to help us with that this morning is a guest who joins virtually all the way from Rwanda. I'm talking about Dr. Innocent Ndahiriwe, who is from the School of Governance, Development and Society. And he will be speaking to the issues this morning. Good morning, Dr. Innocent Ndahiriwe.
Yeah.
To have you on Early Exchange again.
Hello?
I can hear you, Dr. Innocent.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We're looking at the Kenya and Ghana economy, but beginning with the Kenyan economy, which it's been forecasted that the currency of Kenya, the Kenyan shilling, will appreciate against the US dollar in this week and, of course, in the incoming week. What are your thoughts on the reasons attributed to for this increase or the appreciation of the shilling against the dollar?
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me again for sharing views and ideas in relation to the two economies of Kenya and Ghana. In relation to Kenya, Kenya has been having a big problem of food insecurity. But recently, the government injected in a lot of money into subsidized fertilizers. And this increased food availability to the population. And that greatly contributed to the growth of the economy. And the other day, the president of Kenya was thanking a particular region of Kenya for having produced plenty of maize. The majority of people in Kenya eat a lot of maize. And therefore, once there is maize, then the country is extremely secure. And that one helped greatly to improve their currency because there was money available. And because there was money available and people are getting funding, people had income levels going up because of maize production. So that is basically what happened. And in the process, the Kenya currency, the Kenya shilling appreciated.
So, well, we have actually ascertained that, yes, there is some positive from this. The Kenyan economy is strengthening because of the shilling is also strengthened. I would want to know, from you, what do you think this would do to the export sector? What impact would it have on export from Kenya?
Yeah. Kenya has quite a number of exports. Kenya's economy has been going on very well. So they have quite plenty of exports in terms of, for example, tea, coffee, and other exports. But what was the problem mainly before was that Kenya being a dry, but the majority of areas in Kenya are extremely dry. 3/4 of the economy is supported by agriculture, and 3/4 of the rural area is basically involved in agriculture. And therefore, the exports, 3/4 of the exports are mainly agriculture. They export plenty of flowers. They export tea. Kenya exports tea, one of the biggest producers of tea, and coffee. And therefore, that's what they have been doing. The biggest problem has been that bit of food production, which the government is trying to solve. And actually, the president was thanking himself and other for doing a good job. I think the exports won't be affected as long as there is food availability in the country.
All right. Talking about exports, and we know that tea is quite dominant in terms of what Kenya exports to the world. They're actually the third largest producers of producer of tea in the world, followed by they follow after China and India in that aspect. But that itself is challenged by competition from other countries and also the instability in the global price of tea. As one of the major earner for the Kenya economy, if that is threatened and that is part of what is serving as a boost to the currency appreciating, what then happens?
Okay, good. Thank you for that question. Yeah, that is a historical problem. That is a historical problem. For example, as you mentioned, Kenya exports tea, Tanzania exports tea, Uganda exports tea, Rwanda exports tea, and all of it goes to Mombasa in Kenya for auctioning. So all these governments do not decide the price of tea. The tea is auctioned, and the best tea gets the high price, and the poor quality gets almost nothing. That's a very big problem. And actually, now this is the biggest challenge that Kenya has. And actually, generally, the region is having a very big problem with tea exports. What has been saving some countries is actually coffee. Coffee has been stable, and the price of coffee has gone up. Many countries like Uganda are now advising their people to actually grow coffee rather than tea. And even Kenya, the government is encouraging farmers, especially around the Mount Kenya region, to go into coffee because tea exports have been extremely unstable and very unreliable. And again, tea is a very labor-intensive crop. It engages quite a number of people, and people survive on picking the tea, weeding the tea. Actually, generally, the tea industry employs many people. So the instability of the tea industry means that many families become affected because they depend on the salaries and the income they get from the tea industry. So it has been a problem. I agree with you. It has been a problem, but what countries are doing, especially Kenya, is diversification to ensure that they don't overdepend on Kenya because their economies are affected on the tea industry. Right now, the tea industry is not doing very well. It's not doing well at all, and countries have been affected. As I've mentioned, Uganda is saying, please don't go into tea, instead go into coffee. Then another problem which comes with the tea industry is that tea requires a lot of land. There must be a lot of land. You cannot, people who engage into tea with small pieces of land, as it is in Kenya, do not benefit much. Therefore, it is something that is very delicate and the governments have been advising people to go into others. That's why, for example, they have gone to flowers and other more profitable crops.
So when you say Uganda is asking Kenya not to go into tea, concentrate on coffee, it's actually very funny that you want to determine for a sovereign nation what exports they should embark on. But then that's, by the way, the Kenyan government has said between the 25th of July and the 14th of August that they are going to raise about 50 billion Kenyan shillings, and that's through tax-exempt securities, right? What other policies have been put in place to actually strengthen the Kenyan shilling, and what's the sustainability of those policies?
Okay, thank you. One of the policies actually has been promotion of tourism. Kenya has been doing very well in terms of tourism, and because of the demonstrations that took place recently, Kenya was worried that they would get problems, but it seems as if the tourism industry has not been affected. So what has been done is to ensure that the tourism industry is promoted. I think that is the best substitute. I think that's what they are trying to do, to make sure that the tourism industry flourishes, then to save and solve some of the problems that have come because of many factors.
All right. Aside in exports, and that has also helped to strengthen the Kenyan shilling exports and the bond, which the government is offering, which is bringing in some inflow. There is also reduced imports, which has helped strengthen the Kenyan shilling. But let's look at the reasons why there have been reduced imports and the kinds of imports that have reduced. Now, Kenya, like many other countries, imports a lot. They import machinery and some other things. But there have been reported decline in the importation of machinery due to reduction in industrial activity and even infrastructure projects. Is that should we call that progress, or there are some reasons why Kenya has reduced its importation of machinery and why some of these infrastructure projects have actually slowed?
One thing we should also understand, the Ukraine and Russia conflict, and also the COVID situation has made many people, many countries think of reducing on imports and instead increasing on exports, and also trying to consume and buy what's made within those countries. And I think that's what the Kenya government is also done. Over-dependency on other countries is becoming a problem to many countries. And many countries are now saying, let us try to depend on ourselves from the experience they got from Ukraine. Kenya and many countries in this region were importing a lot of wheat from Ukraine. The economy of Ukraine was, especially the agricultural area, was doing very well. And many countries were relying on wheat from Ukraine. So the countries which have been affected, have decided to ensure that they produce what they need and they reduce on imports. And I think that's what has happened. Even the COVID-19 was a bad experience. It was a bad experience, and many countries are trying to reduce on imports and trying to see how to survive on their own rather than on others. I think that may be the problem.
Okay, it feels like, okay, he has dropped that. And would want to take a look at inflation in Kenya. The report has it that inflation has dropped drastically. If you're taking a look at what happened in July, I'd want to find out from you, Dr. Innocent, what could be the factors that has influenced the drop in inflation in Kenya at the moment?
The point is food availability. Now there is food. The government subsidized fertilizers, and people are using fertilizers, which the government has subsidized, and therefore, because of food, that's why inflation is coming down. Food is a very big factor in relation to inflation. Once the food goes up, the prices go up, the inflation goes up. That is one of the biggest contributors, the biggest factors. Kenya now has food. They don't have problem with food because government subsidized fertilizers. They have been buying maize and other foodstuffs, and that has been that has managed controlling inflation. That's how I look at it. That's how I look.
All right, so you mentioned that the government of Kenya subsidizes some items in the country, and that's part of what has led to the reduction in inflation rates. But beyond subsidizing, because we know that subsidy sometimes is a short-term plan, and it can also have its own effect on the government revenue. But beyond subsidizing for the inflation, has there been some implementation of certain monetary policies to help tackle inflation in Kenya?
Yeah, okay, thank you. One thing which the best would be that government exports products and they get for next year. That would be the best. But in the absence of, or in the case of challenges, the policies that are there are that there must be growth of the domestic economy, and that is what Kenya government is doing. As I mentioned earlier, they invested into coffee agriculture, mainly actual agriculture and tourism. So the best way is the policies that they have made are policies which uplift the domestic economy. And the domestic economy, once it is flourishing, it's doing well, then inflation is controlled and there is stability in the economy. That is how I see it.
So basically, you're saying that government controls the prices of food products, fuel. I mean, doesn't that have any adverse effect on the economy if, they don't allow the prices of these things to be determined by market forces?
The market forces, you see, there's no way government cannot get involved. Once the problem in the economy, the population suffers, and therefore government must be involved. The state makes policies. The state, it's one of the obligations of the state to ensure that they make policies. So if they make policies that do not favor this population, they get problems. That's what you have been saying. That's why you have been seeing people on the streets. They become violent because they are hungry. So one thing which we need to understand is that this business of saying promoting the private economy, the private sector, letting the market forces of demand supply take course, whereas those are very good economic principles, there is no way the state should avoid and things take their own course, because the consequences are normally bitter for the state consequently. I can give you an example. The structural adjustment programs of the 80s and the 90s, and actually later in 2000, brought problems to many of these countries. And that is what the policies were advocating. The policies were advocating increasing the participation of the private sector, leaving the forces of demand supply take course, but the consequences of the structural adjustment programs were very bitter, and actually it increased the conflicts in Kenya, Uganda. So there were trouble. There were troubles all over because of those policies. So according to me, the state is supposed to monitor through the National Bank to monitor the performance of the economy and give guidance without leaving the forces of demand and supply take course. And actually now, the subsidies have saved Kenya. If Kenya had not provided subsidies for fertilizer, there would be I don't think even the regime in power now would be in power. They would have got even more problems. So that is the argument which the president was saying that people are saying we are doing badly, but we are not doing badly because at least now we have food. It saved him. It saved him. Otherwise, wouldn't be in power. Would be getting problems. So food is something very important. Government engagement is very important. Government must monitor the performance of the economy through the central bank. And where possible, there must be government intervention to save the majority of the population. And actually what normally happens is that the private sector, which is very powerful, influences policies. They make sure they influence regulatory measures that come through parliament. Actually, in some countries, they even bribe to ensure that policies which favor them are passed. So the policies which are passed by parliament in most cases favor the private sector, and that is the language of the World Bank. So we have very powerful financial institutions supporting privatization and leaving the population suffer because the policies do not favor them. So that's something we also need to understand. There's need to make policies which favor the majority of the population and not the rich and the World Bank as it has been. The consequences have been very bitter. The examples I've given you about the structural adjustment programs of the 80s and 90s and also 2000, it is evidence that we need to make policies which favor the majority of the population.
All right. If you can see what's on the screen now, you see pictures of the Kenyan protest. As much as the Kenya currency is expected to actually appreciate against the US dollar, let's look at the implication of the protest on Kenya's economy and by extension its currency. Okay, if you can hear me, I'm asking now, we've been talking about Kenya's currency and we're looking at the implication of the protest on Kenya's economy. Could you respond to that? Are we expecting to see some implications on the economy that would affect the stability and appreciation of the currency against the US dollar?
Yeah, of course. The situation has been rectified. One thing which the government of Kenya did was to first of all leave anything to do with the tax laws which they are trying to make. Secondly, another point which the Gen Zs wanted was removing cabinet. The government removed the cabinet. So apparently the government has done all that the Gen Zs wanted, and therefore demonstrations have not subsidized. Another problem which was there was an inclusive government, and some members of the opposition have been integrated into government, and that is what was one of the requirements. So hopefully the situation will remain normal as it is now. Otherwise, demonstrations and the violence in a country like Kenya, of course, destabilize the economy and um, and of course, the government has tried to do what it was supposed to do. So I think now the government, may be happy that things are changing. I think the situation is now a bit normal.
Say good thinking, good product, one of the foremost mottos that trended, in the manufacturing sector. But then if you had to put side by side the Kenyan shillings and the Ghana cedis, how would you say they compare with other currencies in other regions of the world?
Yeah, Ghana has a problem. Cocoa production has also been unstable, and I think it also affected the economy. Cocoa has been I think Ghana is one of the biggest producers of cocoa in the world. So cocoa has a problem. Production of cocoa has gone down. The prices are very stable. So it is like actually the tea in Kenya. So I think Ghana is also going to make sure they get alternatives that is similar and not over dependence on cocoa. If you can remember what I mentioned last time, one of the things which Ghana must do is to add value. Unless Ghana adds value to cocoa and they begin also making chocolates.
So talking about Ghana, now it is expected that the Ghana cedi will maintain stability, but there are going to be some fluctuations owing to the bond coupon repayment and corporate import demand. How can this be reduced? In the case of Kenya, we mentioned that Kenya is reducing imports. Now, if on the other hand, Ghana, there's a high demand for imports, especially by the private sector, what can be done to reduce some of this so that the currency can remain stable? Dr. Naira, if you can hear me, the question is this. Comparing Ghana and Kenya, in the case of Kenya, there was reduced importation. Now, on the other hand, Ghana is having a high demand for corporate imports. How can that be reduced so the currency, the Ghana cedi, remains stable?
The Minister of Finance in Ghana was very optimistic. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, he was speaking to a group, and he said that the economy of Ghana was going to shock the whole world. And this is coming despite the fact that Ghana's economy has experienced some sort of turmoil. If you had listened to Dr. Innocent at first, he said, there was a bit of a struggle, especially with exports, and cocoa
Yes.
sales has dropped. Some persons will rather you give them some other form of currency rather than the cedis. And if you put that side by side with other currencies from other regions, you find out that the Ghana cedi is not doing so well. But then there's been a slight jump. I think it was 15.41, an increase from 15.48 as against the dollar. And, some persons will measure that as some sort of improvement. But then how sustainable is that? In the next coming weeks, we're hoping that some of the policies that the Minister of Finance has said President Nana Akufo-Addo will be implementing would definitely have some positives on the income, on the economy of Ghana. But then that's yet to be seen, if that will actually happen. But then Ghana is navigating through a very complex global economic uncertainties at this point in time, and it might be expected that the authorities put the machineries in place to ensure that it bounces back.
Talking about machinery, those are some of the needs of the corporate industry, the private sector for production. And while they have had some growth, had some increase in terms of how the Ghana cedi is appreciated, Now, talking about sustainability, if the import demand continues to rise, that may just erode the gains that have been made so far. And like what has happened in Kenya, though, that was not because they began to manufacture some of those things they import by themselves. There was actually a decline in industrial activity, and there was also the emphasis on local content. So they have to look inward for some of those things. Maybe Ghana too may have to look inward for raw materials for some items that they import. So reduce the import, because you know that for countries that import, it's if you don't have a strong
It takes a toll,
currency,
even on your foreign.
yes,
Your foreign
it does.
reserve.
It does. Like what has happened in the case of Nigeria, where Nigeria is largely import dependent, and Nigeria doesn't have a strong currency. So you see how that has affected the country and led to increase in the price of goods and services. So that may just be replicated in Ghana when some of these things are not locally sourced or substituted, so that instead of always importing, yes, the corporate industry, it's about profit. It's how you buy. That's what they say on the street. How you buy, that's how you sell. So if your materials and the inputs that you need for your production, you import, and over time your currency falls, it means you will import at a higher cost. That cost gets transferred to the end user.
Consumer.
All right, we have Dr. Ndari back with us. I was asking about the Ghana situation, where unlike the Kenya situation, there is decline in import. There is actually increase in corporate import, demand for corporate imports in Ghana. Now, looking at this situation vis-a-vis the Ghana Cedi, which is projected to be stable, what are the chances that that stability will be sustained?
Okay, good. Thank you very much. That's a good question. The question of sustainability is a question that all countries must answer. One thing which we also need to understand is that we have been rigid. We are not changing. We are not diversifying our economies. We are depending on few items to prepare our economies. Ghana has very many things, very many items, has very many economic activities that they can do to prepare the economy through diversification. I think that's what Ghana should actually now embark on. Let them make policies that diversify the economy, increase on imports, and where possible, they should reduce on the traditional, on dealing with the traditional partners. We have been exporting raw materials to Europe, America, and so let them diversify the economy and ensure that they deal with, for example, the African continent. Ghana has a goal. Ghana has quite a number of millions. There are quite a number of Ghana can also invest into tourism. So let them diversify and build the economy without overrelying on few items. That is what I see as a problem in Ghana. Another thing which also Ghana has that many countries do not have is that Ghana has a highly developed human resource. It's a very big factor. The educational system in Ghana is high. They have high quality education, and the public service in Ghana is highly skilled. So let them get a solution from the population, for example. I'm sure if they decide to sit down with the population, there is a lot Ghana can do. So let them sit down and make reforms. The reforms that will help them to solve some of the challenges they currently have. That is how I see it.
Dr. Innocent, the Minister of Finance, Amin Adam, had highlighted some of the measures that President Nana Addo had put in place to actually stabilize the economy. Apart from initiatives to diversify the economy, to reduce the dependency on volatile commodities, he talked about debt restructuring, which he says has ended, and fiscal consolidation. Now, while speaking to a group of people some weeks ago, he said that the economy will grow and it will grow faster than everybody thinks. Now, for you, if you look at that statement, as strong as and confident as it goes, is there some light at the end of the tunnel for the economy of Ghana from your own end, from your own perspective?
I read the presentation of Mohammed Amin, the Minister of Finance. I saw him as a theoretical economist. See, as I mentioned, we need to make policies which are pro people, pro population. When I read his budget, what he was talking about was what you just mentioned, promoting the private sector. In economics, there's something they call the trickle-down effect. He believes in the trickle-down effect. Support banks. Banks give the private sector money, and they do investment. Then that thing has not worked for very many years. So the trickle-down effect has not done very well. What many people have now resorted is engaging population into the economy directly. So people produce coffee, they produce cocoa, they produce tea, and they consume it themselves. Let me give you an example, which I think is working in Rwanda here. Coffee, initially it was being exported as a raw material. We now have very many coffee processing factories. We have reduced on the export of coffee as a raw material. The same thing is happening to Uganda. The same thing is happening to Kenya. They are now thinking of producing coffee and exporting it as a raw material. I mean, as a processed product, adding value. The point of value addition. I think there are things which you need to do. The point of value addition. Otherwise, thinking that a small group of people will prepare the economy, I don't think it has worked. The trickle-down effect, I think, is not working. And that's what I saw in promoting.
All right, as we look at these two economies, what could be the potential benefits of the stability of Ghana's Cedi and Kenya's Shillings? What is the economy expected to benefit from it?
Yeah, once the economy is stable, then people also have stability of income. Because, and you plan it properly. Once the economy, the currency is stable, you can plan and say and make investments. But once the economy is unstable, people become also unstable. They can't make investments. They can't make savings. And once they don't have savings, once they don't have investments, then there is no capital accumulation. And once there is no capital accumulation, then the economy can't grow. That is where the problem is. So stability of the currency is very important because people have hope in the currency. They value the currency. The currency has integrity, but once the currency loses integrity, then it affects the population that's supposed to save money and investments and the capital accumulation, which finally becomes a problem to the economy because the economy doesn't grow.
Many thanks, Dr. Innocent Diary, for your time with us on the show today. We will be glad to have you next time as we look at other economies within Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. It has also been a pleasure for me to interact with you. I'm extremely grateful and thank you very much.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.